I spent 3 years quietly funding my brother's restaurant dream, paying every invoice under a company name he'd never connect to me, attending none of the planning meetings, signing none of the congratulatory cards. But when the grand opening finally arrived and I walked through the front door of the place I had essentially built from the ground up, the hostess checked her list twice and led me to a table near the kitchen, wedged between the restrooms and a decorative wine rack. The table had no candle. The table had no reserved card. It just had me, a glass of tap water, and a clear sightline to the VIP section up front where my mother was already standing with her champagne raised, telling Lucas's gathered investors that she had always believed in him. Always. Even when no one else did. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and didn't say a word. But before the night was over, I left something on his podium. When he opened it mid-speech, the entire room went silent. My name is Catherine. Most people call me Cat, which my mother always said suited me because I landed on my feet no matter what. She didn't mean it as a compliment. She said it the way people say someone is resilient, when what they really mean is that person didn't get to fall apart the way everyone else did. Lucas is 7 years younger than me. When our parents separated, he was 11 and I was 18, and the math of that difference meant everything. I was old enough to understand what our mother had done. He wasn't. What she had done was spend the money. Not hers. Mine. A college fund my father had quietly set aside for me over 12 years, deposited into a joint account. She convinced him to open because she handled the family finances and it was simply easier that way. By the time I graduated high school and went to access it, the account held $47. She'd been withdrawing in careful increments for 6 years, small enough amounts that no single transaction would alarm anyone. She had a gift for that. For making the damage look accidental. When I confronted her, she did what she always did. She reframed it. She told Lucas, who was 11 and devastated by the separation and desperately needed someone to be the villain, that I had accused her of being a thief over a misunderstanding about paperwork. She told him I was cold and calculating, that I had always been more like my father than like her, and that my father had never loved any of them the way she had. She planted those seeds with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been gardening that particular soil for a long time. I watched my brother slowly turn from me over the following years the way you watch weather change through a window. Gradual. Unmistakable. The phone calls got shorter. The holiday visits stopped. By the time he was in his mid-20s, and I hadn't seen him in 4 years, our entire relationship existed in the occasional text message, usually a birthday greeting or a forwarded meme that meant nothing. I built a life anyway. I married, then I didn't. I started a consulting firm that did well enough that I could work remotely from wherever I needed to be. I kept my apartment in Denver, took the occasional weekend trip, and told myself that the particular ache of having a brother I no longer knew was something I had made peace with. I hadn't. I just got better at carrying it. The car accident happened on a Tuesday in November, 18 months before the restaurant opening. Black ice on I-70. A truck that couldn't stop in time, and then 6 weeks of recovery in a facility that smelled like antiseptic and cafeteria chicken soup. I had time to think. More time than I had ever wanted. And the thing I kept returning to, in those long afternoons with nothing but the ceiling and my own thoughts for company, was Lucas. Not what he'd taken from me. Not the wasted years. Just him. The kid who used to collect bottle caps and sort them by color. The one who cried at the end of every movie, even the ones that weren't sad, and then immediately denied crying. The brother I had loved without condition until condition was the only language our family spoke. I found him on social media the week I got home from the facility. His profile was public. He had dark circles and a flour-dusted apron in most of his photos, which confused me until I read his bio. He was working in a commercial kitchen in Nashville. Had been for 2 years. He was saving to open his own place. He had a wife named Maya, who had warm eyes and a laugh that filled the frame of every photo she appeared in. He had a life I had never been invited into. I stared at those photos for a long time. Then I called my lawyer and asked about setting up an LLC. I named it Anchor Point Consulting, which meant nothing and connected to nothing, and I used it to begin funneling money into Lucas's restaurant fund. I found his business plan through a crowdfunding page he had set up, which had raised $1,200 in 8 months. I read the whole plan in one sitting. It was good. It was more than good. It was the work of someone who had been thinking about this for years, who understood food and atmosphere and the specific alchemy that made a room feel like home. The plan needed capital, a proper kitchen build-out, a liquor license application, a point-of-sale system, staff for the first 6 months before revenue stabilized. It needed about $300,000 to open correctly. I had the insurance settlement from the accident, most of my savings, and a line of credit I was willing to use. I did the math. It was going to leave me lean for a few years. I didn't care. I hired a restaurant consultant to make the initial contact with Lucas, presenting Anchor Point as a small private investment firm interested in supporting independent restaurant concepts. Lucas never knew who was behind it. He sent formal updates every few weeks to the Anchor Point email address, which I read alone at my kitchen table in Denver, learning about my brother through the business correspondence of a stranger. He was good at it. The negotiations with contractors, the vendor relationships, the obsessive attention to the menu sourcing. He sourced his grits from a farm 2 counties over. He drove there himself to meet the farmer. I read that in an update email and sat with a feeling I couldn't quite name, something adjacent to pride but sharper, like looking at someone through glass. He opened the Anchor table in Charleston, South Carolina in early spring. The name was a coincidence, or maybe it wasn't. I chose not to read too much into it. The invitation arrived 6 weeks before the opening. A proper card, cream-colored with navy lettering, addressed to Catherine Mercer with a handwritten note tucked inside. Kat, I know this is out of nowhere. I'd really like you to be there. Please come. Lucas. It was the most he had said to me directly in nearly a decade. I held the card for a long time. Then I RSVP'd, yes. I told myself I was going as a guest. Just his sister, attending an opening, nothing more. I would watch him succeed at something he had built and I would be glad for him and I would ask for nothing in return. That was the plan. It was a reasonable plan. I bought a dress, deep green, which had always been my color. I drove to Charleston 3 days early and stayed in a hotel 6 blocks from the restaurant, walking the neighborhood in the mornings, learning the streets. I passed the Anchor table twice a day on my walks, watching through the front windows as the staff trained and the final details came together. The bar Lucas had chosen was reclaimed wood from a barn outside Asheville. The lighting was warm and low. The pressed tin ceiling caught everything and gave it back golden. It was beautiful. I had made it possible, and it was beautiful. The day of the opening, I arrived at 7:15 for a 7 o'clock start. Not fashionably late, not eager early, just slightly behind to avoid the bottleneck at the door. I wore the green dress. I had done my hair. I was holding a card I had bought that morning, just a simple congratulations card with nothing extravagant inside, just my handwriting saying I was proud of him. The hostess was a young woman with an elaborate updo and a laminated seating chart on a clipboard. She found my name after a moment's pause and looked up with a smile that was professionally calibrated to reveal nothing. Right this way. She walked me past the bar, past the main dining room with its warm light and the tables full of people I didn't recognize, past the semi-private area near the back where Lucas's investors sat with their cocktails, and all the way to a two-top wedged between the server station and a wine rack that hadn't been properly anchored to the wall. The table had 2 chairs. No candle. No card. A number placard that read 31. Table 31. I sat down. I smoothed my dress. I ordered a glass of water from the passing server and looked out at the room with the careful neutrality of someone who has had a great deal of practice absorbing disappointment without showing it on their face. From table 31, I had an unobstructed view of the reserved section near the front window, the best table in the room, positioned so that anyone standing at the podium would naturally look toward it. My mother sat there in a dusty rose blazer I had never seen before, her hair freshly colored, looking exactly as she always had when she was performing a version of herself for an audience. Her husband Gerald was beside her, a retired contractor from Knoxville who had been in her life for 12 years and had always been pleasant to me in that particular way of people who have been briefed. Lucas's in-laws were there too, Maya's parents, who seemed kind and slightly overwhelmed, and Maya herself, who had left me a brief and warm voicemail the week before saying she hoped I would make it. Lucas moved through the room greeting guests, and when he finally saw me at table 31, something crossed his face that I couldn't fully interpret. Not surprise, exactly. Not quite guilt either. He came over and hugged me, briefly, The way you hug someone you're still learning to be related to again, and said you look great, Kat, really glad you're here, and then was absorbed back into the crowd before I could say much in return. I heard my mother's voice carrying across the room as the evening progressed, performing the narrative she had been rehearsing for this moment. "That's Sandra," someone said nearby. "She really believed in this project from day one. Gerald basically made this place happen. They put up most of the funding." I turned my water glass or lee in my hands and kept my face still. The formal program began at 8:30. A local food writer said a few words. Maya's father made a warm toast. Then Lucas took the podium, and the room went quiet with the particular attention people give to someone about to say something that matters. He was good at this too. His voice had the confidence of someone who had spent years commanding a kitchen, who knew how to be heard. He thanked the staff by name. He talked about the sourcing philosophy, the farm connections, the commitment to the region. He was specific and sincere, and the room responded to him the way rooms respond to authenticity. Then he turned toward the front table and thanked my mother and Gerald. Said they had never stopped believing in him. Said their support had made the difference between a dream and a reality. My mother pressed her fingers to her mouth and looked moved. Gerald nodded gravely. Someone started applause. I was gripping the edge of table 31. The card was still in my purse. The congratulations card with my neat handwriting inside. I had been going to give it to him at the end of the night, quietly, with no expectation. I reached into my purse and felt the envelope, and then my fingers found something else. The other envelope, the one I had written in my hotel room 2 nights earlier, at 1 in the morning, when I had lain awake thinking about all the things I had never said. I had written it in the same way I imagine anyone writes something they don't know if they'll ever send. Not to wound him, not to make him feel indebted or guilty or small. Just because the truth was a thing that existed whether or not it was spoken, and I was tired of being the only one who carried it. The letter explained everything. Anchor Point Consulting. The 3 years of invoices. The Barnwood bar he had loved at first sight. It explained what our mother had done to my college fund when I was 17. It explained the campaign she had run against me in the years after, and how I knew it had worked, and how I had never blamed him for believing her because he was a child and she was his mother, and that is what children do. It ended by saying that I had not funded his restaurant to be repaid or recognized or thanked. I had done it because he was my brother and I had never stopped loving him, and sometimes love is the only accounting that makes sense. I had told myself I would decide tonight whether to give it to him. Sitting at table 31, listening to my mother receive a standing ovation for something she had nothing to do with, I made my decision. I waited until Lucas stepped away from the podium to take a photo with the food writer. I crossed the room with my chin up and my shoulders back, the way I had learned to walk into rooms that didn't expect me, and I set the envelope on the podium's small shelf beneath the microphone. Then I returned to table 31, collected my purse, and walked out the side door into the warm Charleston night. I didn't go far. I found a bench at the edge of the small courtyard between the restaurant and the building next door, beneath a live oak that was older than the street around it. I sat there and looked up at the Spanish moss and waited. It took 11 minutes. I know because I looked at my phone when I heard the applause stop and the silence begin. That particular quality of collective silence that happens when a room full of people suddenly has no idea what to do with themselves. Not the silence of boredom or the pause between speeches. The silence of a held breath. Then Lucas's voice came through the restaurant's open window, no longer using his confident public register but something raw. Something I recognized from a long time ago. He was reading aloud. His voice stumbled and caught and steadied itself and stumbled again. I heard the word anchor point, and then I heard the word mother, and then I couldn't make out the words anymore, only the tone, which was the tone of someone rearranging everything they thought they knew. Maya came out first. She pushed through the side door of the restaurant with purpose, scanning the courtyard, and when she found me on the bench she walked directly over without hesitation. She had clearly been crying, but her jaw was set with determination. She sat beside me without being invited and said, "I owe you an apology and I don't even fully understand why yet, but I know I do." I told her she didn't owe me anything. She said, "I've had a feeling about Anchor Point for 2 years, something about the way your mother flinched when Lucas mentioned them. I asked her once if she knew who was behind it and she changed the subject so smoothly I almost missed it. But I noticed." We sat in the live oak's shadow for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said. "Of course. Why didn't you just tell him?" I thought about that for a long time before I answered. "Because," I finally said, I didn't want him to feel like he owed me his success. I wanted him to know he built it. He did build it. I just cleared some of the ground. She was quiet again. Then Lucas was there, standing at the courtyard door with the letter in his hand, his event night blazer slightly wrinkled, his eyes red in a way that his public face would have never allowed. Behind him, through the open door, I could hear the confused low murmur of 200 guests who had just watched the guest of honor walk off the podium in the middle of his own opening night. His wife stood and gave him a look I couldn't fully read, but that clearly communicated something complete and private between them. Then she quietly went back inside, and it was just the two of us. He sat on the bench where Maya had been. He held the letter with both hands. He didn't look at me for a moment. "The Barnwood," he said finally. "Yes. I drove to that farm myself. I thought it was fate." I smiled even though my eyes were burning. "It might have been." He turned the letter over in his hands. "The college fund." He said it like he was trying to hold the shape of it. "All of it." I told him what I had written, not again, just affirmed it. That it was true. That I had documentation if he ever wanted to see it. That I wasn't asking him to believe me over her without evidence, because I understood what it was to be a child handed a version of events by the person you depended on. "That's what she does, isn't it?" he said quietly. It wasn't exactly a question. I waited. "She did it with Dad too." He put his elbows on his knees and his head in his hands. "When they split up, she told me he had a gambling problem, that he'd spent us into debt. I was 11. I believed her for 15 years. Then I ran into him at a conference 2 years ago and he stopped. He was just a normal guy cat. A normal, sad guy who missed his kids. He had no idea why I had cut off contact with him. I let that sit between us." "I'm sorry," he said. "Lucas." "No. I have to say this." He looked up at me. "I treated you like a stranger for a decade because she told me a story about who you were. I never questioned it. I never picked up the phone and asked you for your version. Not once. And the whole time you were." He gestured toward the restaurant, toward the barnwood and the pressed tin and the sourced grits and all of it. "I wasn't doing it to make a point," I said. "I know that. That's the part that's killing me." For a long moment, there was only the oak above us and the distant sound of someone inside asking if Lucas was all right and Maya's voice telling them to give him a minute. "What happened in there?" I asked. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I read the letter out loud. I don't even know why. I started reading it and I couldn't stop. And then I looked at Mom and I asked her if it was true and she started explaining, which is what she does instead of answering. And then Maya's dad asked what Anchor Point was and someone else said they thought Gerald had funded the build-out and Gerald said he paused. Gerald said he'd never given a cent. He said Mom had told him that the investment firm was a silent partner who didn't want recognition and he'd assumed it was a friend of hers." He looked completely confused. I absorbed that. "She didn't even use the money herself this time," I said slowly. "She just took the credit." He nodded. "She just needed the story." We sat with that truth for a moment, turning it over. There is a particular grief in understanding someone clearly for the first time. Not the grief of loss but the grief of seeing, finally and without softening, the exact shape of the damage they have done. "She's still in there," I said. He was quiet. "I'm not going to tell you what to do," I said. "She's your mother. She's mine too, technically, though we've mostly moved past that. Whatever you decide about her, I understand. I'm not asking you to choose." He looked at me sideways. "Why not?" "Because I've been alone with this for a long time and I've survived it. I don't need rescuing. I just wanted you to know the truth." He was quiet for a long time. Inside, I could hear the careful sounds of a party being guided gently toward its close. Glasses being collected. The background music lowering. Maya managing things efficiently and kindly, the way she seemed to manage most things. "I should go back in," Lucas said. He didn't move. "Your guests," I agreed. I started to stand. He put a hand on my arm. "Not yet." I sat back down. He said, "When I got your letter, your RSVP, the actual one, just your name." I sat in my car for 20 minutes. I didn't know how to have you there. I didn't know what version of you was real. The one Mom described or the one I sort of remembered from when I was little. He paused. "I remembered you teaching me to ride a bike." "Did that happen?" "It happened," I said. "You crashed into Mrs. Peterson's mailbox and cried for 10 minutes and then got up and did it again." He smiled. A real one, not the public version. The one I recognized. I put you at table 31 because I didn't know where else to put you, he said. And because Mom arranged the seating, and I let her because I always let her arrange things and I didn't think hard enough about what that meant. I'm sorry for that. It's okay. It's not actually. He straightened. But I'd like to do better. That was enough. It was more than I had allowed myself to hope for when I sat alone at table 31 with my tap water and my clear view of someone else receiving credit for my work. It was more than I had hoped for when I wrote the letter at 1 in the morning with my hands shaking. It was the simple, enormous thing of being known by someone who had been a stranger to you for too long. Maya reappeared at the courtyard door. She had her husband's second blazer over her arm, which she held out to him, and behind her the restaurant had quieted to the hum of a few remaining close friends who clearly knew to wait. Your sous chef wants to know if you're coming back in, she said to Lucas. And Kat. There's a couple at the bar who recognized your name from the letter and want to meet you. She paused. I told them to give you some time first. Lucas looked at me. His wife had brought him his blazer in the middle of a crisis and managed his opening night and apparently also memorized the guest list, and I thought that I would very much like to know her. I'm not going anywhere, I told him. He nodded and stood, shrugged on the blazer, smoothed the front of it with both hands the way people do when they are putting themselves back together after something real. He looked older than the kid in the flower-dusted apron photos and also somehow more like himself. Our mother had left. I found that out later, from Maya, who said she had walked out shortly after Lucas left the podium, Gerald quietly behind her, not making a scene, which was consistent, because she had never needed scenes when she had narratives. Whatever accounting was coming between Lucas and his mother, it was not mine to witness or shape. I had said what I came to say. The rest was theirs. I went back into the anchor table and I had the best meal I had eaten in years. The grits were extraordinary. The lighting was exactly right. The pressed tin ceiling caught the last of the candlelight and scattered it across the faces of the people still there, who were talking and laughing with the relieved looseness of people who had witnessed something true. Lucas came to my table at 10:30 and sat across from me with a glass of the good bourbon and no agenda, and we talked for an hour and a half. Not about any of it. About the restaurant. About Denver, and whether the altitude was really as brutal as people said. About the bottle cap collection, which apparently still existed in a shoebox in his and Maya's hall closet. About the small things that accumulate between two people when they are allowed to finally take up space in each other's lives. When I left at midnight, he walked me to the door and we stood on the sidewalk in the warm Charleston air. The street was quiet. Through the restaurant window, Maya was doing something efficient with the reservations tablet. I'm glad you came, he said. I'm glad you asked, I said. He hesitated, then said, I'm going to call that lawyer you mentioned. About the college fund. Not necessarily to do anything legal. Just to understand what actually happened. Is that okay? That's yours to decide. Will you help me? Yes. The hug we exchanged on that sidewalk was not brief the way the one at the beginning of the evening had been. It was the kind that takes a moment to start because the arms have forgotten the distance and then doesn't want to stop. I walked back to my hotel through the Charleston streets with the warm air moving through the live oaks overhead and the city doing its quiet nighttime things around me. I thought about table 31 and what it had felt like to sit there. I thought about the 3 years of invoice emails and the barnwood and the anonymous accounting of love that never expected a line of credit. I thought about my brother's face when he said he remembered me teaching him to ride a bike. I had not gone to that opening to be thanked. I had not gone to be seated at the right table or introduced as a benefactor, or to receive any portion of the recognition I might have had some reasonable claim to. I had gone because he was my brother and he had asked and I was done with the weight of carrying things in silence. There is a kind of freedom in finally saying the true thing, even when you say it in a letter left on a podium rather than spoken aloud into a room. The freedom isn't in the reaction. It isn't in whether anyone applauds or understands or changes their behavior accordingly. It's in the setting down of it. The act of refusing, even once, even at this late hour, to be the only person in the family who knows what's real. I had set it down. And across town, in a restaurant built with barnwood and settled grits and 3 years of anonymous care, my brother was closing out the register on his first night in business. His wife was checking the door locks. The pressed tin ceiling was gathering the last of the light. Some things begin in the strangest places. Some reconciliations start with silence breaking across a room like weather. Some brothers find their way back to you on the other side of a letter you almost didn't leave. Some tables at the back of the room turn out to be exactly where you needed to sit to see everything clearly. I turned my hotel key in the lock and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time in the dark, not sad, just still. Outside, Charleston went on doing what old cities do. And somewhere in it, my brother was probably also sitting in some quiet room, holding a letter that had changed the shape of what he knew. That was enough. That was, I thought, more than enough.